Been talking about the 20s, the 1920s, the Roaring 20s, the Jazz Age, which makes it sound like a great time period, fun time period. Some issues going on, but it sounds like a good time. But that good time, of course, is leading to the Great Depression, and a lot of the things that we talked about in 7.1 actually are going to end up causing the Great Depression. And this is a big topic. We're going to cover it fairly quickly. This is something we could spend probably 2 weeks talking about, but we're going to try to get it done in just a few minutes. Now, you didn't have to write this in your notes, but I wanted to kind of put it out there so you have it, so you can understand. I wish I just need to give you a little bit more. So that economic boom that we've been talking about, it had some negative consequences for some segments of the economy. Electricity is great, and it led to having all those appliances. That's an awesome thing. But because people now have electricity, they don't have to rely on coal, particularly for energy. So the coal industry is going to suffer during the 1920s. Now, a lot of people are employed in the coal industry. So this is going to put huge segments of our workforce out of a job. So unemployment starting there. Farmers, we did talk yesterday, day before, about the mechanization and the overproduction and how that's going to lead to not needing as much labor. So those who may not own their land, but work on farms, not needed as much. But also the overproduction leads to a reduction in price, and that mechanization also leads to an expense too, because they're going out there and buying those farm implements. Also, mass production is wonderful. That assembly line is great, and it allowed us to make a lot of stuff easily. Like the car, but what happens is skilled workers are marginalized. They're not as important, and you just don't need the skilled workers, so they don't get the jobs, and either that or they're working on that assembly line, which is an unskilled position. Okay, and by the way, that's not a fun position. It's an easy position, but it's not fun. It's very repetitive. You're doing the same thing over and over, but with some pretty decent, I say decent pay, because the next thing we're looking at is workers still being underpaid. And that's not to say all workers are underpaid. That is not to say that everyone is making a substandard salary, but you begin to see this widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You begin to see a declining middle class. And that's probably the best way I can put that. And so that brings us into these underlying causes of the Great Depression. Industrial production and per capita income are up. So that seems like we're doing well. We're making it, and income overall is up. But again, it kind of hides what's underneath, and part of that is that disparity in income and that distribution of wealth. Again, the gap between the rich and the poor becomes greater. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Wages for most workers are going down, or they're kind of staying the same, stagnating. They're not really moving with the times. Producing a lot and selling a lot, shouldn't salaries be going up? But for most workers, they aren't. And we talked about the installment payments, the installment plan. Think about a credit card. This is pre-credit card days. Credit cards aren't around until 1955, but think about that credit card. Do you reach a limit? Is there a point where you have to stop living on credit? You get to a point where you can't afford to make the minimum payments. And once you reach the limit of your credit, you can't buy anything else. The problem is that a lot of people during this time period reached their limit at about the same time, and so all of a sudden, it was a trickling to begin with, but toward the end of the 20s, nobody's buying anything because they can't afford it anymore. So all of these things themselves are kind of these underlying causes of the Great Depression. And why did it seem prosperous in the 20s? Well, some of that has to do with presidential policies during the 20s. During the 1920s, we have two Republican presidents, Coolidge, Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. And both, I'm going to focus on Coolidge, but I will say both believe in laissez-faire economics. Now, Coolidge supported big business, didn't think that government should be interfering with the growth of business, and a natural business cycle would fix any problems. Again, let's pretend like I can spell. Would fix any problems in the economy. And there is a certain truth to that. And if you look at the cursor, our economy goes up. But again, what goes up must go down. Now, whether it's a small dip and we go back up or it's a deep dip, depends on a lot of different things going on. But that's a typical cycle, up and down, and it is natural, okay? And a lot of times with this laissez-faire attitude, by the time you really notice that you're in a depression, you're on your way out of it, or a recession, you're on your way out of it. So there is some truth to what he's pushing here. But things are going to get really bad really quick at the end of the decade. So, but his laissez-faire beliefs are going to play into this idea that the 20s are prosperous. And again, does government truly interfere? Yes. Tariffs, and they do help big business. You can see here he supports big business. We talked about it in Chapter 5 where the government supported big business over labor. So you do see interference. What this really means here is backing up on government regulation of business. Okay. Also in the 1920s, the stock market is booming. It's doing well. Get rich quick. A lot of speculation. Probably the best way to talk about speculation is house flipping. You buy a house cheap, fix it up, sell it for big money. And you hope you turn out right side up on that instead of upside down. Well, that's what people were doing with the stock market. It was a lot of speculation. Speculation is just a big gamble. But they're also buying on the margin. They're borrowing money to buy this. And there's really, this is bad business on the bank. Should the bank be loaning you money to gamble? And that's essentially what they were. Now, you consider that when they loan you money, they're loaning you money that other people have put in the bank. So here we can kind of get a glimpse of a problem that's going to come up when things go bad. Technology is also going to be a reason for this prosperity. Mechanization is going to allow for that assembly line of Fords, which is going to transform the auto industry, as well as other industries. And again, think about that auto industry and how important it is to the overall health of our economy. This is going to help the steel industry, and you got to have tires, so you got to have the rubber. Got to make the glass for the windshields, but also gasoline. That's going to help out that oil industry. You got to make roads, so asphalt, and the jobs to lay the roads. So you need gas stations. So the birth of the convenience store. Here you go. So this technology is going to help out with the car, but again, it too helps out with farming, which we talked about the other day. But mechanization, whereas it helped the car, it's going to actually lead to overproduction with the agricultural industry, and it's going to cause those prices to drop drastically in the 20s. Now, part of this is because during World War I, American farmers are supplying Europe. They're supplying America's food, but also Europe's. They're in the midst of the war, and they need our produce. So we're providing for us and them. So the government wants us to produce a lot, and so they set a really high floor price. It was almost double what the natural market price was giving them. And so I think they were selling wheat at like almost $2 a bushel when naturally it would have gone for about $1. So farmers are making money hand over fist, and it makes sense to go out there and buy land and buy a tractor and make more, produce more. The problem is that in the mid-20s, they're going to face some foreign competition in the form of the Soviet Union, and so Europe is going to begin to buy Soviet wheat, which is going to mean that we're now producing way too much. The government's also going to back off of those subsidies, and the price per bushel is going to begin to dramatically fall. So what happens is that by the time we get to the mid-20s, the farmers are actually already experiencing a depression. Now, nobody else realizes this because, remember what we said, most people now live in the cities, and this is really only affecting rural areas. So most Americans, or at least more than a little over half of America, isn't really going through this. But, you know, you have drop of farm income, then you have land you got to sell because everybody's trying to sell, or because you have to sell, the price of land is going to fall. And so in the mid-20s, you're going to end up in that agricultural depression. 1 million farms lost by 1934, and that's right there at the low point of the Depression. This gives you a few more just specific numbers, going from $69 an acre in 1920 to $31 an acre in 1930. Now let's get past the $69 and the $31 an acre. Those are different dollars than today, but you kind of see that land loses over half of its value, and that's significant. Look at the average income for an American farming family, $750, and it falls to for the average American, but it's $273 for farm families. So you can see the problems they're having. There's just not enough there for everything they need to repay mortgages, loans, taxes, and then buy seed and everything else that they're going to need. By the time we get to the Depression, you have about 30% of Americans still living on farms. And you just see, these are cotton bales, but just look at the number of cotton bales sitting there. So again, and it wasn't just overproduction with wheat, but it was overproduction in general. And here you can look at prior to World War I, this is the price of agricultural products, but look at it at the low point of the Depression. This is the worst couple of years. This right here is the 1932 is when Franklin Roosevelt is elected, and 33 is when he takes office. So look at how much it's dropped in 20 years. Most of it by at least half, and some of it a little bit more. Look at your milk. It actually gets to the point to where it costs more money to try to sell the milk than actually getting it to market and selling it. So farmers are having some issues. They're having some problems, and naturally they're going to look to the government for help. We had seen this during the populist era. Times are bad. They look to the government for help. What's the government going to do? Well, Congress is actually going to respond, and they're going to pass bills to increase farm prices, and you would think that that would help out. The problem is that Coolidge is going to veto them. He thinks this is price fixing. This kind of plays into his philosophy of laissez-faire. The government needs to back off and let it fix itself. So what this means is that the agricultural industry is going to continue to flounder. They are going to continue to sink, and they're going to be unable to recover. And a lot of them are going to go into foreclosure, leading to the fact that by the end of the 1920s, you have only about 30% of Americans farming. So it's pretty significant. And again, just you can kind of look at some of these, Congress and their farm bill, and you know, he's set to whack it. And this is a great thing. Look, this is a great slide looking at Calvin Coolidge's policies and the fact that he does believe in, he's pro-business, but also limited government. But he doesn't want the government to really step in. You can kind of just take a look at this and see. One of the problems with all that overproduction, and now government did interfere during World War I, and it did kind of lead to this, but that overproduction led to a massive environmental or ecological disaster, probably considered one of the biggest man-made disasters in U.S. history. Even today, considered one of the biggest man-made disasters in U.S. history. Our farming practices, we were using the plows, those tractors, and we were digging up the prairie. And the grass on the soil on the prairie is very good soil, but it's been held in place forever by that buffalo grass, by that really, I mean, I think I read that at some points that grass went 5 feet deep. The roots of that grass went 5 feet deep. So this is kind of holding all of that soil into place, but because you can make a whole lot of money by planting wheat or planting, you know, corn, whatever it is we need, you're going to be able to buy that land out there, and by out there, I mean out west, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, moving up, pretty cheap, pretty inexpensively, and they're going to start to farm and to grow as much as they can so they can make as much money. And so those farming practices, that's going to lead, of course, to that overproduction. And the other problem, the area that this encompasses, well, it experiences times of drought, and probably a decade before, they had experienced drought, but this has, and this sounds very similar to today. The rains came, and they have some very good years of farming, some very good agricultural years. And you have agents who sell land actually saying, oh, times have changed. We, planting out here actually is going to lead to rain. And so a few years of rain, and everybody's coming out here and buying this land. And then you get into the 1920s and the rains stop. And then the winds blow. And the winds always blow out here. There's nothing to stop the winds. So the winds constantly blow on the prairie. Whether it's breezes or whether it's big winds, it just constantly blows. Well, as you can imagine, when the droughts come, it dries out your soil. And then the winds come and it's going to blow it away. And so you can see here the area of the Dust Bowl. Now here it goes all the way up. Okay, the Dust Bowl is just in this area right here. This is where the worst of it was. But notice how much territory is actually affected by those winds and that drought. Okay, would this have happened had we not moved out there? No, it wouldn't. Would we have moved out there if government had interfered with the prices of wheat or the prices of some of these goods? No, it wouldn't. That said, though, it did happen. And the Dust Bowl is just what it says. It turns this area into a big old dust storm. And the winds are going to blow, and it's going to blow it pretty far. It actually gets close to D.C., believe it or not. Not the big dust pictures that you're getting ready to see, but just the dust moving. Now these are big, this is a big deal. You're going to see some pictures. This is kind of hard to see detail because it's kind of fuzzy, but here you got a man and his 2 sons, and that poor little kid looks like he might get blown away. And you can just see the clouds as it comes through. You literally can't see when these big dust storms blow through. You can't see, and you have to stay in, and if you get caught out in it, hopefully you've got somebody you can hang on to. And this is the same guy that I saw. I told you that little boy looked like he's going to run out or blow away. I think that's a little boy, but he's got a pail of water, and it looks like sand dunes, and they're trying, and here, this is post, that's a bunch of barbed wire. Can you grow anything on this? And so it's going to devastate our economy because of our farming. But what happens to the people who depend on the farms? What happens to them? Well, as you can imagine, because they can't farm, they're going to lose it. And what you can see here with the arrows is the people in these areas are going to be forced to move. They're going to be forced to move because their land is taken, foreclosure. They can't make the payments because they can't grow anything. So you're going to see some massive movement, some migration with this. And you can see that they don't move very far, except right here. You can see this group right here moving out to California. So there's some massive movement out to California because of the Dust Bowl. And let me go back to this picture here, and you can see this one lady with all of her kids. She's a 32-year-old woman. She has, I think it's 5 kids, and her family are migrant pea pickers. They pick peas, and you can see just the poverty. They're homeless. They look pitiful and dirty. I mean, we could go on and on. Another example, this is a guy on his farm and his family, and you can look at their clothes and tell that they're just worn. There's so many great pictures about the Dust Bowl and even during the Depression, but we're going to move on from that. Like I said, we could spend weeks on this one topic. So the farms are going to enter into the Depression first, and we're going to enter into the Dust Bowl. We're going to have the Dust Bowl disaster, and it's going to carry on for a while. Going back to the Dust Bowl, just to point out a few problems with that. Look at this. Look at these dust clouds. There is always dust in the air. Even if it's not rolling into a dust storm, there's always dust in the air, and it is always coming into the house, and you're always sweeping it up. It is in your flour. It is in your bedding. It is on your floor. It is in the air, and people are constantly breathing this in. And so what happens is that part of this disaster is that it leads to some really bad illnesses, particularly the young and the old, and you're going to see quite a few deaths to lung ailments. So it really is a true disaster of just monumental proportions. So when does the rest of the United States enter the Great Depression? Well, again, the truth is that we were probably already in the Great Depression in the mid-20s, but because of the installment buying, because everybody has a car and a toaster and a vacuum cleaner, we just don't know it. Everybody's buying stock, and so they seem like they're doing well on paper. There are a lot of millionaires because the value of their stock is really high, but the reality is that it wasn't real. And everybody figures that out on October 29th, 1929. Now, that's Black Tuesday, but I need you to understand that this itself did not cause the Great Depression. This is the point where people realized, oh, we're in the middle of it. So just understand that this was the light bulb clicking on, okay? This was the stock market crash. And what happened is that investors began to look at inventory. And you realize that you're buying stock. Let's just say you're buying stock in a car company because, that's a good stock. Everybody wants a car. Well, by the time you get to the 1920s, all those who could afford a car have a car. And a car isn't something that you go out there, particularly then, and you buy 3 or 4 of. And so that you start looking at the inventories and you realize, well, nobody's buying cars. And then they kind of start paying attention to, well, what are these companies that we're investing in? What are they doing with the money? Well, they weren't putting it into production. They had large inventories that weren't being sold. So it's those who knew what to look for realized, oh, it's a bubble. And so what they did is they began to sell. And once somebody starts to sell, everybody starts to sell, because the stock market is held up really on confidence. And if you lose confidence in the stock market, it's over. So basically what the stock market crash is a lot of people at one time start to sell off. That's going to lead to a collapse of stock prices. And maybe you had bought a stock and it cost $50 for a share. All of a sudden it's worth 3 cents. Well, what if you bought on margin? What if you had borrowed the money? Well, now you owed more than you could pay. And so you lose. Some people lost everything and they're ruined. And brokers who had brokered the sale, and then bankers who had loaned them the money, they start calling in those loans. And the people who had borrowed it, they have no way of repaying. Well, the other problem is that the banks also had a problem. They had loaned all that money out. And when bad things start happening, you want to get a hold of that money and you want to hold on to it. There was no insurance. If your bank was robbed, you lost your money. If the bank goes out of business, you lost your money if it was in it. There was no getting it back to you. You lost. So you have to have confidence in the banks. So when those bankers start calling in loans and they can't get it back because nobody can sell their stock for what they bought it for, it's going to lead average Americans to run to the bank to get their money out. And that's a run on the bank. Banks didn't have the money on hand, and so the bank closed. It went out of business. Literally, banks went out of business. Now, I should say that your banks in rural America, many had already closed because of the money they had put out to help farmers buy more land and stuff. But right now we're seeing it in a more broad sense. More banks are closing. More people are losing everything. Now, not every bank let people get their money out. Now, I can imagine what some of you would do. You're not going to give me my money. Well, we'll see about that. You start a fight. But the truth of the matter is that not every bank closed. Some bank managers told the tellers, shut the bank down, or don't give anybody their money. And they actually saved the savings of the people who had money in there. But that didn't happen across the board. So banks closed, and with it, there goes savings. So people who had saved for years, done. Nothing left. People are actually going to also stop investing on the stock market. Nobody trusts it anymore. Well, that's going to hurt our economy too, because businesses need that infusion of cash to expand and to innovate. So this is going to kind of slow the market even more. Unemployment is going to go through the roof. 25% unemployment across America. And that's significant. It is thought that as bad as it got 08, 09, it was maybe, and it depends on the numbers you look at, but at most it was sitting at anywhere between 11 to 17%. Again, it depends on the numbers you looked at, because you can play with those. So we thought times were bad in 08, 09, but really our unemployment level was so low compared to 25%. And as bad as it is overall, it was even worse for African Americans. 49%, nearly half of African Americans who wanted a job couldn't get one. Still have a lot of discrimination and racism in the workforce. You still have the rule of last hired, first fired. So as soon as things started going bad, they laid off African Americans first. Banks have closed. We've lost our savings. We've lost our jobs. A lot of people are homeless now. They lose their homes. And men and boys began to ride the rails, becoming hobos, literally jumping into trains and riding across the United States. You're going to see homeless villages pop up called Hoovervilles. And some of these are pretty shaky, and others look a little better than, but still. I'm going to show you a few pictures, and I'll talk a little bit about a few things. But you've got, now this, you've seen here the date, October 24th. There was actually a first sell-off, and then businessmen are going to prop it up for a few days, and then you have the final crash. And when you talk about it, look at the 1920s at the height. See how high it went? And then there's that first Thursday. We're going to go back up a little, and boom. That's Black Tuesday right there. And you'll see there's a little bit of a rally, but for every rally, it just kind of keeps dropping. And you get to 1932, 1933. This was a low point of the Depression. This is cute when stock markets go up and down, and then finally you get the crash. And that's what a run on the bank looked like. Everybody's lined up, and you can tell that it's a big line, and some lines are longer than others. And you got a squirrel. Squirrels save up their nuts for the winter. Why didn't you save up when times were good? And he's like, I did. But you lost it all. Again, it shows you how bad they needed it. You got a car, probably cost anywhere between $500 to $750, $800. Selling it for $100 cash because they need the money because they lost everything. Nobody had jobs. No towns just didn't have jobs, and you've got billboards telling the homeless and the jobless to keep going. We can't take care of our own. We're not going to take care of you. Here you have your hobos jumping in the trains and riding the rails. And this is an example of a Hooverville. This one actually looks pretty well kept up and clean. Although I will state that sanitation would have been a major problem in a camp like this. You don't have running water. I don't know where the outhouses would be if they are even there. So sanitation, even though this looks clean, sanitation would be an issue. This is probably a little bit closer to what a lot of your Hoovervilles look like. This one's on a dock, you can kind of see, but kind of messy. How are people going to eat? Well, you got bread lines, you got soup kitchens, and people are literally lining up to eat because they just don't have any money. Soup is a great kind of food to feed the poor. It stretches, starts getting a little low, and you got a lot of people, add water. But you've got feeding the children here, soup and bread. You have a lot of illnesses during this time too. We didn't really talk about it. Polio becomes a really big problem during the Great Depression. Kids don't get the fruits that they need. They don't get the vitamins that they need. And you see a return of rickets. Rickets, you can see this little boy's legs are very bowed. And it's a crippling bow too. But you've got a bone deficiency and a vitamin deficiency that leads to the bones bowing. It can lead to teeth falling out and various other problems that go along with it. So you've got a lot of problems. You've got a lot of health problems, and there just doesn't seem like a way out until 1932 when FDR runs. And that's what we'll talk about is the way he's going to try to solve the problem with his New Deal. But go through, read your notes over again, look over things, and if you have any questions, please ask.